So welcome everybody. It's for me a big pleasure today to host a good friend of our institute, Professor Anne-Marie Yasin, University of Southern California. Professor Yasin, thank you very much to be with us today. Can you please introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Thank you so much, Rocco. It's a pleasure to be seeing you again. I wish we were able to do this in person over coffee or something, of course. But it's a wonderful miracle of technology that we can have these conversations this way. So I'm Anne-Marie Yasin. As you said, I teach at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and I have a joint appointment in the classics department and the art history department. My own training is actually, I began as an archaeologist, a classical archaeologist at the University of Michigan, and then did my PhD in art history at the University of Chicago, where I worked mostly on North Africa. My dissertation work was on late antique North Africa, but in the work I've done since then, I've moved more broadly around the Mediterranean, looking especially to Italy and North Africa, but also further into the East. Eastern Mediterranean work has been kind of the foundation of the first book project I did on saints cults and social functions of sacred space in the late antique period. And now I'm really interested in questions of change, diachronic change in material culture. So I'm fascinated by questions of the ways in which time, especially temporality, is understood or experienced through the material world. The current book project I'm working on is looking at those questions in architecture and looking at those questions around issues of rebuilding and architectural reconstruction. So as buildings either fall into disuse through age or wear or more catastrophic destruction, or just need to be updated, the ways in which those are understood as kind of markers of time, how old buildings are conceived of, how they're perceived, and how people understand their relationship of their present to the past of those places, those structures, and then what they do about them. So how they manipulate them, how they work with those changes that they're either making to buildings or perceiving in the buildings that they're using and moving through to shape a relationship to the past and the present and the future in the way that the buildings are revised or transformed or lived with in their multiple phases of life.
You mentioned sacred spaces, and it was the topic of the great talk you gave us more or less 2 weeks ago. How was your experience at our center in the context of your participation as a guest speaker?
Yeah, no, it was such a pleasure. I have to say, it was a really wonderful event. I don't have the sense that they always work this way, but it was a treat to have. My presentation was paired up with another speaker who's somebody I hadn't known previously. Professor Stephanie Mulder gave an excellent talk. We were sort of back to back, and one of the things I liked so much about the organization of that event was that it was two papers on, in some ways, quite different topics, but on the other hand, talks that had points of contact. And what was so just enjoyable and rewarding and fulfilling about the conversation was both hearing the other talk, but of course the conversation that evolved from the two talks and from the audience. And I was really grateful to you and the other organizers for facilitating that conversation. And some of it is very mechanical in a way, just the way that you had everybody come out of their anonymous space as a Zoom audience and invited them to turn on their cameras and be part of a conversation. And it really did, replicate a bit being in a room together. But also there was a sense that the participants were invited to, but also really engaged in drawing connections between the talks. So it wasn't so much a question and answer period of sort of back and forth about a talk, but really thinking through issues and really people taking on board. And that's incredibly rewarding as a speaker. It certainly challenged me to think through parts of my argument and parts of my framework, both in light of Stephanie's talk, Professor Mulder's talk, and in terms of the questions that were being asked. But it also, I started to get a sense, and of course one wishes there were more time, but I started to get a sense of the kinds of issues that everybody else in your community was interested in. And you know, one wishes we could have more conversation to learn more about everybody else's projects too. But it was a very substantive conversation, and I really, really appreciate that.
We are very glad that you enjoy the experience with us. So you can say you can imagine collaborating with us again in the future, because you saw a good potential at our institute, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that was so great was to see the ways in which, you know, by design, you are very intentionally bringing in people from multiple areas of expertise and who work on both different periods but also different cultural milieu, let's say. And you know, that makes such a rich conversation by bringing those people into the same room together, and then by doing it as a recurring set of events, you start developing a real you know, an ongoing conversation among that community. And you could really tell from the way that the Q&A and the conversation was going, that people have been engaged in thinking through problems that are not necessarily, you know, in their immediate area of expertise, but we're stretching to talk through issues that other people are bringing to the table. And that's, you know, wonderful and remarkable, and not done often enough, as well as bringing people, obviously, now that we are by necessity doing everything on Zoom, it does mean that we can also bring in people from further afield. We don't all have to physically be in one room together. And there are, of course, many, you know, disappointing sides of that, but there are wonderful things too. And it means that, you know, I think in this case, from my perspective, living on the West Coast of the United States, one doesn't get to participate in conversations that are going on in Europe or elsewhere as often as one likes. And to have that opportunity is great. And I think we do need more of these kind of intellectual communities being more integrated and talking to each other more. So that was absolutely wonderful. And I can imagine for scholars, for other people in the audience, and especially for students, that's something we definitely should be doing more of.
Great. Professor Yasin, thank you very much for the lovely interview and for the lovely time together. And I hope to see you personally live here in Hamburg at the University of Hamburg, because you will be every time very, very warm welcome.
Oh, thank you. I would love that. That sounds wonderful.